9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Welcome to the Orbital Perspective podcast, where we dolly zoom out to a perspective where upcoming megatrends become visible. Every day, it is more and more apparent that we are in the midst of the Great Transition. Everything is changing rapidly. The fundamentals of business, government, and society are being rewritten almost on a daily basis. We are truly living during a time where the riskiest course of action is to stay the course. The most hazardous path is to take the tried and true. We are also living during a time where it is becoming more and more apparent that the status quo is not working. At least it's not working for everyone. And until the status quo is working for everyone, we will do nothing more than slap temporary band-aids on our problems and our challenges. We are presently dealing with crisis after crisis. But these crises can serve as a wake-up call. They can be our call to action to incorporate the changes necessary to make us all more resilient and better equipped to deal with the future crises that will undoubtedly come our way. The Orbital Perspective is all about transcending the divisive walls that separate us and embracing the awe and wonder of our shared humanity. What all the guests on the Orbital Perspective podcast have in common is they are all able to see things from a slightly different perspective. And when we look at issues from different perspectives, we see things in stereoscopic vision. Multiple perspectives allow us to see the depth of a situation below the two-dimensional us versus them surface. The other thing all our guests have in common is they are all proof that you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective. Now, this is not an interview, and it's also not just a conversation between two friends. It's a conversation amongst all of us. If you're listening live, please post your questions and your comments so that we can bring you into the conversation. And if you're listening to the recorded conversation, still please join in with your comments and questions and be a part of this evolving community. Thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation from the Orbital Perspective. Hey everyone, I hope this message, this episode, finds everyone safe and healthy and coping and navigating with the world that we find ourselves in 2020. It's been a unique one so far, and I am really excited. We have a special treat today. We are going to hear a very unique perspective, a perspective of a true servant leader, one of the greatest leaders of American military history. And I'm really excited about that because we are going to talk about a whole range of really important topics that are timely and are really relevant to all of us and to what we're going through at this present moment. And so we've got a lot to talk about. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our special guest. General David L. Goldfein retired from the U.S. Air Force on October 1st, 2020, after over 40 years of military service. General Goldfein's last assignment was as the 21st Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. As Chief, he served as the senior uniformed Air Force officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of over 685,000 active duty, Guard, Reserve, and civilian forces serving in the United States and overseas. As a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Goldfein served as a military advisor to the Secretary of Defense, National Security Council, and the President. General Goldfein received his commission from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1983. He is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Weapons School and is a command pilot with more than 4,200 flying hours in various aircraft, including the F-16 and the F-117. He has flown combat missions in Operations Desert Storm, Allied Force, and Enduring Freedom. General Goldfein comes from a long line of military service. His grandfather served in World War I with the U.S. Navy, and his father was a colonel in the Air Force and fought in the Vietnam War. His two brothers and his daughter also served or are currently serving in the Air Force. Prior to serving as the U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff, General Goldfein commanded U.S. Air Force's Central Command, Al Udeid Air Base, the 49th Fighter Wing, 52nd Fighter Wing, the 366th Operations Group, and the 555th Fighter Squadron, the famed Triple Nickel. Goldfein flew combat missions in the F-16 during Operation Desert Storm, and as commander of the 555th Fighter Squadron, he led the Triple Nickel flying an F-16 in Operation Allied Force. In Operation Allied Force, NATO pilots attacked targets in Serbia to force Serbian dictator Slobodan Milosevic, who had led an ethnic cleansing campaign against Kosovar Albanians, to withdraw his troops from Kosovo. The first phase of the air campaign focused on taking out Serbian air defenses. During one of those missions, on May 2, 1999, Goldfein's F-16 was shot down over western Serbia by a surface-to-air missile fired by the Yugoslav Air Force. Goldfein successfully ejected and was subsequently rescued by NATO helicopters. Please help me welcome a great leader, great American hero, and a great human who I am proud to call a friend, General Dave Goldfein. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Ron. How you doing?
How's it going? It's good to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. I wish, if I did your true bio, it would be the whole episode. It would be the whole hour-long episode. So we gave a very abbreviated version of that. But thank you so much for taking the time. I know everybody has got a lot of questions, and I think this is going to be a really good conversation. So thank you.
Well, I just after listening to that, I want to sign you up to do my eulogy someday.
Well, I'll be long gone before then, so I don't know if that's possible. But hey, just to get started,
Yeah.
We've known each other for 30 plus years, and in all that time, your only call sign that I ever remember was Fingers.
Yeah.
Right, and so I hear that you have a call sign change now that you're retired, and you just retired like 4 days ago. I don't know, it's about 7 days ago, right? And after 40 plus years of military service. So before we get into that, thank you for all that you've done for our nation and for the world throughout that service. And so, Fingers, what happened there?
Yeah. So my new call sign is Dave.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying that. My other call sign, actually the most important call sign I've ever received in my entire life, is Pawpaw.
There you go.
Grandpa to my two granddaughters, and we have two more on the way. So that's job one right now in chapter 2. But the call sign Fingers, it came actually when you and I were in the 17th TAC Fighter Squadron together back during WW Desert Storm.
Yeah.
And if you remember, when we went to Al Dhafra, I was placed in charge of the setting up the bus route to get us around the base.
Yeah.
And we had leased a bus that had one of those accordion doors.
I do remember this now.
Do you remember that one particular senior officer put his hand on the door, and I crushed his fingers in the accordion door, and so you earn your nickname, and that's what I got.
If I remember correctly, that was the senior military leader in our detachment there.
Correct. Great move.
Yeah, so it wasn't in a typical famous name the new guy night.
Right.
Great. So can we just start by talking about the highlights of your career, the 40 plus year career. You've been in combat in multiple theaters, and I know that there's a lot of lessons that you've learned throughout those decades, and I know that you're really generous in sharing those lessons that you've learned along the way. And so and particularly a lot of folks that are listening are going through a crisis, right? There's crises all around us right now, and it's leadership during times of crises that you have demonstrated so well. And I was wondering if there's any examples of that you could share with us.
Yeah, I've got a fundamental philosophy that I've learned over the years, learned from others. One of my great mentors, General Mike Ryan, who was, I served with him when he was a 3-star, and I learned a ton. And one of the things that I believe is that every challenge in life that we're handed has an opportunity. It's embedded there. Sometimes the crisis of the moment, it's hard to see it at the time, but it's the leader's job to find the opportunity in every challenge. And so there are some crises, I would say some challenges that we're facing, COVID not the least of them. But in that challenge is some incredible opportunity. I think we've all learned that there are different ways of doing business that are very effective. This podcast, just as one example, we found that we can gather together and do work that doesn't require us to all be together in one location like we've done in the past. But I will tell you that in terms of the many experiences that I've had, and I'd be happy to dive into this if you'd like to, but you mentioned in the opening that I've got this odd number of takeoffs and landings.
Yeah.
And I sit here today because of some young men at the time, because women weren't in special operations. For me, some young men who risked everything to come get me and bring me home. And you never know as a leader when a subordinate is going to risk everything to pull you out of a burning truck, a bad situation, enemy territory, you name it. And these guys risked everything to come get me out. It gives you a level of humility that I think is so important as a leader. Because when we find the opportunity in every challenge we're given, bringing a bit of humility to the table, I think is as important as any other characteristic we bring.
Definitely. And it's interesting. I also have an odd number of takeoffs and landings, so I've got more takeoffs and landings. That's one of the main things we have in common. But my rescue was by a big burly guy in a bakery delivery truck, so I had a different a different rescue on mine. But I mean, can we talk about that just a little bit? Because I think one of the main challenges you faced through your career was that day or that evening, that night, where you were shot down, and it obviously all worked out for the best. But I heard, and part of that story is I heard that you met the person who actually shot you down. Is that true?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
He's in Serbia. Actually, I don't know his name off the top. It's interesting though. Same guy who got me got the 117. It's actually the same individual, same battery. He was a bit of the MacGyver of the Serbian military. He would rewire his systems and was obviously good at his trade to get to be the one guy who got 2 aircraft. So I have not met him. They have parts of the airplane in my G suit and some other parts, in a museum, I'm told, in Belgrade. I haven't gone to see it or meet him, and I have nothing against doing that. I just haven't had the opportunity.
Yeah. So is there any lessons learned that you can share from the experience and the challenge?
I think more, I use the experience I have used in the past. Now that my new call sign is Dave, I have used the experience in the past to provide leadership lessons, and there are a ton in there. We talked a little bit about humility. I think there's also a lesson here in taking care of those who are entrusted to our care. Leaders, and this goes beyond just the Air Force. Leaders, we have a lot of challenges, and most of the issues we deal with or work with are tough, and they ought to be tough, or we probably ought not be spending our time on them. And when it's all said and done, and it's time to make that key decision on which way you take the organization, it really all comes down to fundamentally your character. It's the foundation of success in any role that any one of us take on. Because when you're in that final decisive moment, It's a combination of your core instincts, it's your core beliefs, and it's the sum total of your experiences that add up to the best decisions for the organization. So I've been able to use that experience for a lot of good leadership lessons along the way.
Awesome. I want to remind everybody, I see you all popping in and joining from all around. So join the conversation, be an active participant here. Send your comments, send your questions, and we'll try and address them as best we can. So General Goldfein, you've faced a lot of challenges. General Dave, you've faced a lot of challenges throughout your career. Most recently is your time as the Air Force Chief of Staff, and there was a number of crises that occurred. Obviously you were there when COVID started. You were there when the George Floyd incident happened, and we had racial unrest throughout the country. And I know that you've taken those head on. And is there anything that we could talk about with those?
It might be worth, I think, talking a little bit about sort of how Chief Wright and I handled the initial days after the tragic killing of Mr. Floyd. Certainly a national tragedy that released a lot of frustration across the nation. And the nation did what our nation does. When it's faced with something like that unjust action, it gathered together to demonstrate. It's part of who we are. It takes us all the way back to the beginning of our history. And so Chief Wright and I decided that in every challenge, an opportunity, and the opportunity that was being presented to us was this opportunity to have tough, uncomfortable conversations that help move the service in a way that we all know it needs to move, and we have been moving, but would allow us to accelerate that movement towards a institution that's the gold standard for inclusiveness, belonging, and diversity. Because it's not just about diversity. It's just not about having a diverse group with different backgrounds. It's more than that. Does an airman of all backgrounds, religious, racial, sexual orientation, do they feel like the organization embraces them and they are included as part of a valued member of this team? Do they feel a sense of belonging? And so, we began this difficult but very important conversation between, this African-American leader came from a very poor background. If you know Chief Wright's story, it's the American dream story. It's a success story. It comes out of a very poor family. His entire family, living in a 2-room apartment, and several generations. And then he grows up to be the senior enlisted leader of the entire United States Air Force. His life experiences are vastly different than yours and mine. I mean, every room you and I walk into is full of us. Every system we've ever dealt with, to include our promotion system, our assignment system, have been essentially built by folks like us for folks like us. And so if you begin the conversation with this acknowledgement that, you and I bring different life experiences than Khalith Wright, that bring different experiences than Marianne Miller or Jackie Van Ovos, the 4-star general in charge of Air Mobility Command. If we start the conversation understanding that we have different life experiences, then it gets us to a better level, that we can actually really attack the root of the challenges we face as we go forward. And I will tell you, I couldn't be prouder of General C.Q. Brown and Chief Bass, who have taken it even to the next level now across the Air Force, because we're the Big Tent service and we ought to be the best in the business when it comes to inclusiveness, belonging, and diversity.
Yeah, when you were getting ready to retire, I was really worried about whose hands the Air Force would be in, and I was so thrilled that our mutual friend C.Q. Brown was selected to take over the Air Force. I think we are in very, very good hands with CQ. What a great leader, great pilot, and then, another F-16 guy, so that can't be bad. So, but yeah, thank you for your leadership through those difficult times. Obviously, we're still in them. Our diversity is what gives us strength in problem solving, strength in everything that we're trying to do. And it's not, we don't want a completely homogenous solution, problem solving force. We need diversity of perspectives, diversity across the board in every way. And thank you for your leadership on that and setting an example, frankly, for that. The other issue that I touched on, and again, I'm going to remind everybody, jump into this conversation, send us your comments and questions, is COVID-19. And can you speak to the virus's effect on our military readiness and how the armed forces are dealing with that crisis?
Yeah, I tell you, I couldn't be prouder of how the Air Force and all the services really, and our international teammates have handled themselves. We determined very early that there were certain missions that we would not get relief on, regardless of what happened in the pandemic. And this was very early. The nation was going to require its Air Force to maintain 2/3 of the nuclear triad and a safe, secure nuclear deterrent to get the president where he needs to be when he needs to be there and connected to forces. And there would be no relief on that mission, regardless of COVID or anything else that may come our way. The nation was going to require us to continue to operate globally with global reach to deliver supplies, personnel, where it needs to be. I mean, we're a global power because of global reach. The nation was going to require us to continue space operations regardless of. So we identified key mission sets from which we would get no relief and reset those mission sets to be able to maintain our operational tempo with no degradation. And we're very successful. We called that reset 1. Reset number 2, once we got those missions set, was to acknowledge that we were probably in about 12 months of at least in this situation. And so how do we sustain operations and do the nation's business if we are living with a cyclical virus in our midst? And we're seeing that happen right now as it sort of, tailors down and comes back and comes down and comes back up again. So we did that second reset to make sure that we could continue to keep pipeline training going, basic military training, all those things that, again, the service relies on to be able to sustain combat operations and peacetime operations in a global Air Force. So probably one of the things that I'm most proud of, we had pushed for several years to push decision authority down the chain and where it really has the most impact, which is at that squadron commander level. And our squadron commander cadre across the Air Force just knocked it out of the park. I mean, they took, our little mantra was, don't wait for me, right? Get out there, take risks, stumble, if you need to, get up, keep running. This is too big an issue for you to wait for top-down guidance on everything. So our squadron commanders, group and wing commanders just took off. And I think if you look at the success of the Air Force during this time frame, I hope as history looks back, the success will be at that squadron commander level where the rubber meets the road.
Well, speaking of that leadership, let me pop this up here. I don't know if you can read this, but when leaders make clear mistakes, how should those moments and situations be handled? So,
yeah, so it depends obviously on a number of factors, right? What level of leadership are we talking about, and what particular kind of mistake we're talking about? I don't think I could give you a one size fits all. I will tell you that I tend to celebrate success in public and deal with failure in private, wherever I could. Now, I'll give you one exception to that. There are times when standards are attacked and someone falls below standard, and it presents an opportunity to reset the bar for the entire organization. The example I would give you would be flight discipline. You know, I was never a safety first guy. I mean, if you want to do safety first, then just stop flying. I was a discipline first guy. And when there was a breakdown in discipline, that is one that I generally handled in public. And it was certainly not comfortable for the individual who fell short, but there's an opportunity to reset the bar for the organization in terms of what the standard is for baseline foundational work of the organization. One quick example, we had a crew that did a barrel roll in an MC-12, which is an experimental aircraft. We had not ever tested this airplane. It was designed to fly, in level flight with no more than 30 degrees of bank. We had a lot of gear in the back end that we had put together for a specific mission in Iraq and Afghanistan. And quite frankly, nobody could tell us how that aircraft would operate in aerobatic flight. And we had a crew that went out there and did some barrel rolls and some things, and I got wind of it, and we took care of that in public. So that's the one example I would give you where sometimes you don't have to do things privately because of the good of the institution.
Right. But the baseline of praise publicly and discipline privately, I know from my own observation of your leadership style, doesn't apply to yourself. To yourself, I've seen time and time again where you publicly admit when you have made mistakes along the way. And I think that's a good example of leadership as well. So I want to pop up another comment here from Rhiannon. Amazing conversation. Thank you both for your dedication to creating a more inclusive, diverse, sustainable, and peaceful future for humanity. I think that comment is a good segue to women in combat. We've had a big change back when you and I were flying in Desert Storm. We had no women fighter pilots. There were women there in theater with us, but none of them I was going to say none crossing the border in aircraft, but that's not true. None as fighter pilots, let's put it that way. How do you see the evolution of women in combat over the last few decades, and where do you see it going?
This one to me was an absolute no-brainer. We actually took too long, in my personal opinion, to get to the right place. Good news is a service. When we opened all combat positions to women, for the services, we had the least number of positions that we had to open because we had opened so many already. Women have been serving in combat for far longer than they ever get recognized. And many, I don't know that many know. There's a couple of books written by women who have served, on provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan, women who have served as in special operations, working with other women in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places around the world. I mean, you could take this all the way back to the WASPs, and women have served absolutely brilliantly in combat operations. And the way I see it, every Memorial Day, and I intend to continue to do this, I go to Arlington, and I go to Area 60, and I spend time visiting the families there, but I especially spend time visiting the airmen that I lost.
Well, I think we might have lost the general. Somebody, if you're watching, let me know if we've lost him. I think we got him back. Hold on one second. Oops. Hi, Dave. You still there? Okay, we lost you for a second. You were talking. We lost you right when you started talking about Arlington.
Yeah, so I was just saying that, when you go to Arlington, you have men and women buried side by side. Combat doesn't discriminate.
Exactly.
We shouldn't either.
Yeah, exactly. And a story from our past is when our friend Bill Andrews got shot down on the last day of Desert Storm. There's a number of helicopters that went in an attempt to rescue him. It was an unsuccessful attempt. And a Black Hawk was shot down, and in that Black Hawk was Major Rhonda Cornum, Army Special Forces doctor, and she ended up in the same prison as Bill Andrews in Baghdad, and an incredible story of bravery and resilience. I think we got everybody back online too. That's good. I see you starting to pop back in. What about maybe just to shift gears just a little bit, and jump in if there's any topics that you want to touch on. But one that I know that a lot of people want to hear about is the formation of Space Force. The Air Force Space Command obviously was under your command, and that was spun off and into a separate force as during your tenure as the Air Force Chief of Staff. So can we talk about that for a second and what that means for our future?
I was on my own personal journey on the Space Force. You can go back to look at my initial testimony, and my big worry at the beginning was that we were going to, in the effort to build a separate service, we would separate space from the joint warfight. And because everything I was focused on as chief was joint warfight, aligned with joint warfighting excellence, I was really worried that we would start stepping back from much of the integration work that we have done over many years, to the point where today, a mission commander at Red Flag that walks up on that stage can be a space warrior, and everybody reports to him or her, and that's how we do business. So I was a little bit worried that we were going to lose a bit of that going forward. And then I traveled to Maxwell Air Force Base for a session with our Schriever scholars, and this is about 25, 30 majors, lieutenant colonels who are there to get to essentially almost a PhD level in space operations. And I was talking about the Space Force, and I can tell from the body language that they weren't buying what I was selling. So I asked them, I said, hey, so tell me, how many of you all think that we should have a separate service? And every one of their hands went up. And I thought, okay, these are my airmen, and they're telling their chief, speaking truth to power here. So we started digging into it. That was a seminal moment, and it changed for me, because then I started reading. I was reading a lot. I was listening podcasts, talking to industry leaders, and I came to a fundamental question which was, in all the work that I was doing as chief, spanning the spectrum of conflict from leaflets to nukes and everything in between, and from operating below the surface to outer reaches of space, could I harness the exponential growth in commercial space opportunities and all the things going on internationally with everything else I was having to take care of? Or would a separate chief focused singularly on space operations be able to do that? And I came to the conclusion on my own that Chief Raymond was going to be able to do this far better and far faster than I could do it with everything else I was focused on. And we're a spacefaring nation. And, when I hosted the first International Air Chief Conference on space, and I was listening to countries, and every air chief that attended was telling me about their investment in satellite development, in launch capabilities. And so I became a believer. And once I became a believer on my own, I got behind it. And I truly believe that the president got this one right, that a separate service focused on space, a digital service that can start from the beginning and build what doesn't need to be a large service based on space operations that stays within the Department of the Air Force actually will accelerate our capabilities faster than if we'd kept it under the Air Force. So I think, and I will tell you, I give the team, General Raymond, Chief Toberman, now his vice, John Shaw, I give them a lot of credit for where they've taken it.
So I got a note that came in that said that General Goldfein lost his sound. So I think it's back now. But if you guys, somebody could just confirm that we're actually hearing this. But in the meantime, what do you say to folks that say it's just another layer of bureaucracy, that we have enough bureaucracy in our Department of Defense, and that it's duplication of effort? And so I guess if I can interpret what you've already said is that the focus that you can have by having a singular chief, focusing on space operations, overshadows the increase in bureaucracy that comes from separating out of service.
Well, it's something we got to keep an eye on. There's this old saying that when a new organization in the Pentagon pops up, it does three things immediately. The first thing it does is build a castle. The second thing it does is dig a moat, and the third thing it does is fill the moat with dragons.
Yeah.
Right, because you got to defend yourself from those doggone folks who are coming after your money. That's the sort of typical, bureaucratic way of business. And then someone has to come by much later and build bridges between the organization that's defending itself. We started off focused on building this team within the Department of the Air Force, focused on a foundation of trust and confidence between our two services. If that can continue, and I'm confident it absolutely will under Chief Raymond and Chief Brown, then we won't fall victim to the trap of, castles, moats, and dragons. But I will tell you, that's not something we can take off the radar. We're gonna have to stay focused on that. You and I grew up in the United States Air Force, and there's always a thread of tension between airmen and soldiers in the Army that doesn't exist between the other services. And I think it goes back to how we were pulled apart back in 1947, and that sort of continues through time, right? I often tell the story of my two granddaughters, who are members. They don't know this yet, but they're members of the class of 2040 at the Air Force Academy. And one of them is going to join the Air Force, and one of them is going to join the Space Force. They don't know that either. I'll let them choose. But on that day when they graduate and they walk across that stage, the class of 2020 will be graded. And that's us. That's you. That's me. It's everybody today who are building this new service. And the question will be, what did we build? Did we build a service focused on trust and confidence? One team, not layers of bureaucracy, that moves fast, that's relevant to the leadership of the nation when it comes to air and space operations? Or do we allow this to become a bureaucratic divisive split? So far today, I'm confident that we are on absolutely the right path, but we cannot let our guard down.
Yeah. Another question that I get concerning the separation of separate Space Force is on the outer space treaties that we've signed about weapon proliferation in space. How do you answer those questions? And what are your thoughts on that?
I often like to remind folks that two things. Number one, nobody wins if a war extends or starts in space. Every war game I was part of, when that occurred, everyone loses. Nobody came out the winner. That's number one. And number two, we have to be the nation that collaborates while others may choose to coerce. We cannot fall into the trap of being coercive when it comes to space operations. Because again, I go back to fundamental premise number one, nobody wins. if we end up in that place? Well, if you're going to effectively deter, military operations in and from space, then it's like any other domain. You have to have the capability to not only defend yourself, but you have to have the capability to ensure that the protagonist who is considering military operations in space understands that you have the capability of stopping that and defending yourself. So it's always a little bit of a dichotomy, because on the one hand, you can't just sit back in the ring and take punches. You have to have the capability of punching back, but our intent has to be collaborative. Space has got to be available for all of us, to include the Chinese, to include the Russians, to include the Iranians, to include all of those that today, might be in an adversarial relationship. We've seen those relationships change over time. And so I'm hopeful that we can always maintain the moral high ground when it comes to the militarization of space, and be collaborative and let others be coercive.
That's a great point. And maybe to drive home everybody loses scenario is right now one of the biggest problems we have with space exploration is space junk in low Earth orbit and just in orbit in general. And if we start shooting each other's satellites down, I guess that's the wrong way to say it, because they don't come down. If we start blowing each other's satellites up, then we will, in effect, basically lock every living thing on the planet on Earth. We won't be able to get off the planet because we won't be able to get through the space junk. And maybe to drive that point home, while I was during my 6-month mission on the space station, we got a call that said that a piece of space junk was heading our way. Normally, you know better than I how much we track everything on orbit. For whatever reason, we didn't get enough warning to be able to move the orbit of the space station. So what we had to do is me and my 2 Russian crewmates, and we broke it. Our crew of 6 broke into 2 crews of 3. And we all closed every single hatch on the space station. And then me and my 2 Russian crewmates climbed into our Soyuz spacecraft and closed the hatch. And my other American crewmate, Mike Fossum, and his Russian crewmate and his Japanese crewmate climbed into their Soyuz capsule and closed the hatch. And we just waited there. And we made it by about 15 minutes. We had about 15 minutes to float in the Soyuz and just wait. And what ended up happening, and we got a report that they thought it was a spent upper stage. I don't know where it came from, but it was so imagine something the size of a grain silo coming at us at about 15 times faster than a bullet. Yeah. And it missed us by 300 meters. So had that hit us, it would have completely obliterated the space station. And so that's without any war in space, that we've got all this stuff up there. And so we would rapidly encapsulate ourselves into the Earth right now. So thanks for all the comments about how the audio is good, but that's also proof that you're out there listening. So so jump in here with comments and questions. So Dave, we are at a pivotal point in history, I think, right now. We're at a really critical crossroads. How do you see, from your perspective as a national leader, as a military leader, as a recently retired grandpa, how do you see this present moment in history, and what are your thoughts for the future?
Yeah, there's probably a few areas to dive into, and just so the audience knows, I'm not going to mention anything that would be political given the election coming up. And I will tell you that my personal belief, and it's my own personal belief, is that I forget who it was that said it. Says when you retire your uniform, retire your mouth when it comes to political opinions, and I do that out of respect for those who are currently serving as well, to remain apolitical. So I'm not going to go into that part, but there's a few areas that we can talk to. I think that climate change is a real issue that that we need to have a national and international level discussion on that we owe to future generations. We built an Arctic strategy in the Air Force that now Chief Brown and Secretary Barrett are working in terms of execution. I'm one that believes that in international relationships, there tends to be three elements. There's ideals, affections, and interests. Ideals are those things that you just never back away from because they're foundational to what we believe: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. There are affections, which are those relationships we build that are of trust and confidence that we can tap into when needed. And then there are interests, which is when common interests align. Of those three, the one that's the most important, that will eat the other two for lunch, is interests. So think about what you just described with you and your Russian teammates. So here we are in I would say pretty much an adversarial relationship on the ground with Russia, where we don't really align, but yet somehow in this complex relationship, we found a way to maintain common interests above the atmosphere, even though we can't agree on much below. Such is the nature of complex relationships. And I do believe that there are opportunities out there for us to lead in the international community, given the number of challenges that we face that are global. So therefore, others face them. We talked a little bit about COVID. I was really excited about a channel among air chiefs that was opened, initiated by the Italian air chief, who was one of the first to face COVID, if you remember, in North Italy. And we had up well over 100 air chiefs that were all together, all talking about how we were dealing with this global pandemic and how we were modifying airplanes, how we were contributing to supporting each other as the various numbers went up and down across the globe. And so I do believe that there's opportunities for collaboration, even given the enormous challenges that we face. And this is an opportunity for America to lead, and so many around the world expect us to do just that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because the problems that I think it's really, really obvious that the problems we face are not just national by nature or regional by nature. They're planetary by nature. We face existential planetary crisis, and the only way we're going to solve them is by coming together as a planetary civilization, as a planetary society. And I think you brought up a really good point about one of the ways we do that is by finding the low-hanging fruit, finding the things that we agree on. And the space program, I think, is a really good example of that. I was up there for 6 months with Russians, with Italians, with Japanese, with different people from different backgrounds and nationalities. And I don't remember a single time in 6 months ever having a conversation that had anything to do with politics. And it wasn't because it was off limits. It was because it was irrelevant. That's what those people down there deal with. And from space, all these things that we fight over and quarrel over and that seem so important make us look ridiculous from space. Because from space, you see the true reality that, we're all not only deeply interconnected, but deeply interdependent on each other. And so when one part of the planetary family is hurting, we're all hurting. And we just don't realize that we set up these what's the word I'm looking for? Adversarial. Thank you, General. Relationships when they don't need to be that way. And that's a good point, because, the U.S. military and the Air Force are our military force, right? They are what a nation employs in those cases where combat is the option that is appropriate. But I know that you've been involved a lot in peace building too, in trying to make that unnecessary. And can you maybe talk about that and the long-term view of of maintaining peace throughout the world?
One of the things that I think that we should always consider when we're in discussions and building relationships around the world is that, you know, we're the 800-pound gorilla. I mean, when we stomp into the room, I mean, we're bringing whether you want to measure it in GDP, whether you want to measure it in defense investment, if we're talking military, space operations. I mean, we roll in with sometimes by several orders of magnitude above whatever other nation that we're dealing with. And it's so easy for us to just stomp around like Goliath if we're not careful. But when we bring a little humility and the understanding that perhaps we have as much to learn as we have to teach, it opens new doors for us. For instance, as we ponder, our relationships in the Far East, the Middle East, Europe, South America, no one understands the culture of those locations better than those who live there. And we have so much to learn when it comes to how, someone from Colombia or Japan or Qatar, or Kazakhstan, views a particular problem. And if we're open to listen and we're just, appropriately humble to be able to learn from them, we will come out with far better options for leaders to consider. I'm one of my favorite authors and who's become a good friend, Simon Sinek, who wrote Start With Why and a number of other great books. I think it's important when we talk about diversity, belonging, and inclusion and international relations, because they are tied together, of going back to his premise. All right, so why is this so important? It's so important because the challenges we face are wicked hard. And the solutions that are there, because every challenge in life has an opportunity, the solutions will be far better if we come together as a diverse team with different backgrounds and perspectives, both internationally and from our individual backgrounds, to attack that problem. I saw it just as a joint chief. When we would meet in the tank and the chairman would convene us and we were looking at what kind of advice we would provide the commander in chief, our advice was so much better when all the cultures in that room participated, and so much worse when it was only one or two services, providing that perspective. So, a little start with why is never bad, and a little humility is always good.
Right. I think we are not going to progress as a species without a big dose of humility right now. And it's interesting. We experienced the same exact thing in the space program. Back in the 90s, when we were considering bringing the Russians into the International Space Station program, politically, there was a big food fight about that. Why would we do anything with the Russians while they're doing X, Y, and Z? Until they stop doing X, Y, and Z, we shouldn't do anything with them. And that is the normal course of business, right? If you agree on something, then you use that as a stick to force the things that you don't agree on. But what we chose to do in this case is, luckily, those voices didn't win out. We elected to bring the Russians into the space station program. And initially, it was exactly like you just described. NASA came in, we landed on the moon. We got this beautiful, capable space shuttle. You guys don't have any funding for your program. You have no capabilities that we want to incorporate. And the Russians were saying, you guys don't know anything about space stations. You're just coming here and trying to buy out our space program. But after we started working together and personal relationships developed, we realized there was an incredible amount that we could learn from each other. And the relationship became very, very strong. And to the point where, back when we had the Columbia mishap, the accident and catastrophe, we would have had to shut down the space station had it not been for the partnership with the Russians. And so
right.
It's a really good example of finding that low-hanging fruit, that common ground, and using that as a jump-off point to then start to address the things that you don't agree on, but you're doing it from a foundation of friendship, hopefully a foundation of trust, And I think that's been proven again and again to be very powerful. So I got a note from Jessica. Why do you think that the interest on the ground overtake the amazing feat of cooperation or collaboration in space?
Yeah, Jessica, I don't think they're in competition. Really and truly, it was more of an example of how in complex international relations, you can actually find common interests in one area where you may completely disagree on a vast number of others. And as long as you're continuing to talk and both sides are searching for common interest, then they are there to find. That's the opportunity and the challenge. I mean, so we've had this continual dialogue through the scientific side of the house that maintains this relationship in space between the U.S. and Russia. I ponder what would our relationship look like today if we had invited the Chinese into the space station when we invited the Russians in, because we certainly could use an avenue of dialogue, whether that through the scientific realm or another realm, as we go forward, even though there is a number of issues that clearly we don't agree on, such as the nature of complex relations. So Jessica, it really wasn't a either or. It was just an example of how in a complex set of relationships, interests always win out, and we can find common interests we can find some common interests with just about every country on the planet.
Well, speaking of the Chinese, because the same arguments, the same political fighting, food fight that went on back in the 90s when the Russians were going to come on, that same thing happened when we were talking about bringing the Chinese in. And in this case, those voices did win out. And, the Chinese are going to do amazing things in space with or without us. But if they do them with us, going back to your comment about Simon Sinek, we're going to have a better insight into the why. And again, that could be a foundation to move to bigger things. So Keith Gowing, soft power can be more potent than military power. I think that's really an obvious comment when you think of things in the long term. It may not be as obvious in the short term, but in the long term, about long-term peace and harmony and everything else, I think that's pretty true. What do you think about that? Are you frozen again? I think we lost General Goldfein again, or maybe you're just concentrating.
Nope, I'm back.
You're back. Okay, you were frozen for a second. Did you hear the question about soft power?
I saw it come up. It was soft power. More.
Yeah, I was making the point that that's certainly true and obvious in the long term. Sometimes in the short term, it's harder to see that, but certainly in the long term. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the military power, absent a political and economic framework for operations, is rarely effective. So you always have to think of this, hard power in terms of what it is that you're truly trying to achieve, and what political objectives are you trying to achieve, and what's the economic framework within which you're operating. When as a Joint Chief, for him, as a retired now general officer, I would contemplate offering the Commander-in-Chief a military option. But to the comment about soft power being more lasting, more more compelling, absolutely. It's probably worth talking for a minute about this concept of best military advice, or how do we offer advice. When you become a 3-star general, or for certainly a 4-star, you testify in a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee. There's a series of questions that the chairman asks, and one of those questions is, do you agree to provide your personal opinion to this committee, even if it differs from the current administration? And the only answer to that, of course, is I will. So as a confirmed 3 and 4-star, we have an obligation to give our advice to civilian leaders. not one civilian leader I've ever worked with or for has ever had a similar responsibility to take our advice. And so that's an important nuance that we have to remember at all times, right? The perspective of the military officer coming to the table is generally going to be narrower than the leader that we're advising. So take a look at, the commander in chief. When I thought of national security and responsibility of the Air Force, there are a few things that I was thinking about, right? Critical infrastructure, key cities, Operation Noble Eagle, cruise missile defense, those kind of things. But you know what I didn't worry about, Ron? I didn't worry about Wall Street. Wasn't in my job jar. Didn't worry about ports. Didn't worry about Amtrak. Didn't worry about the futures trading that was going on. I didn't worry about any of that. I didn't worry about the ships that move goods and supplies up and down the Mississippi. I mean, point being that there are a lot of things that were not on my radar. The civilian leader that I'm advising has got to fit that military option into a much broader perspective, and then make a informed choice on whether to use military power or not. So it all goes down to the point of soft power being, yes, far more effective. There are times when military power is effective, but it has to be within an economic and political framework.
Well, Dave, I hope there comes a time where it's part of your job jar to be worried about all those things. And I know you didn't want to talk about politics, but if you ever throw your hat in that ring, I'd like to help any way I can, because I think you are a true American hero, a great leader, a servant leader, probably one of the best, if not the best, Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force we have ever had in the history of the Air Force. And so, again, I want to thank you for everything that you've done for our country, for everything that you've done for the world. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to continue it offline for everybody who's watching, and we'll try and make that available to everybody. But Dave, I just want to say thank you so much for not only being here, but for everything that you've done.
Hey, thank you, Ron. And if I know we're in a time block, but if I could share one quick story with listeners.
You bet.
So there I was, the 3-star in Qatar, sitting there in my hooch with my deputy, and who was Reverend Jones and Todd Walters.
Yes.
And the phone rings, and I pick it up, and the operator says, "We have a phone call from the International Space Station. Will you take it?" And so, of course, I said, "Well, not collect." And sure enough, calling from the International Space Station is astronaut Ronnie Guerin. And I remember having this conversation with just the four of us. You had said, "Hey, I'm flying over Qatar. I was thinking about you. Just wanted to call and check in." And when we hung up the phone, I thought, what an incredible American success story, right? So here we are, 4 guys, who as captains were one step ahead of the law, at Nellis Air Force Base. And now we're running the International Space Station in the air war, in the Middle East, only in America. So thank you for your service and leadership, Agent, over many, many years. And you inspire all of us.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate that. And when we were running around, I've known you since we were captains, but I've known CQ since we were lieutenants. So the Air Force is in good hands with CQ.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you next week, and stay tuned. Thank you for joining us during this conversation from the Orbital Perspective. And thank you for being a part of an emerging unity on our planet. We are strongest when we are aligned around the truth of our underlying unity. Together, we are unstoppable and can build a positive, restorative future, a future that we would all want to be a part of. Please subscribe to the Orbital Perspective podcast and follow us on social media. Thank you for all that you're doing and all that you will do to help make life on our planet as beautiful as it looks from space.